So again, thank you very much for joining us today. Today's program is the 10 Warning Signs of Alzheimer's with Dr. Carol Stevens. Dr. Carol has worked as a psychologist for over 35 years. She is currently on a mission to increase community awareness about changes in thinking, in memory, in older adults, and the grave importance of early identification and intervention. Her goal is to assist older adults and their families to be intentional in planning for a future with a quality of life until the end. In her psychology practice, she specializes in treatment of depression, anxiety, insomnia, and mental health issues in adults, seniors, and their families. So she will be our presenter for the next 3 programs. So for right now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Carol.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me? I have a pretty big voice. I told Kristen that I've worked in long-term care for about 20 years, and I realized that almost everybody I saw couldn't hear me, so I just developed a big voice. So most of my friends and family, when I'm talking to them, they kind of say like, but for this is good. Anyways, thank you so much to the library and to Kristen for, I had a conversation probably a month ago with you, 2 months ago. I can't remember your name, Laura. And we talked about doing something, and we got it going. And my mission, as Kristen said, is to educate the community about dementia and Alzheimer's and other cognitive disorders, because it is all around us, and it's very hard to detect and see. And I think in this community, people are extremely loving and kind and respectful, and they do not want to offend people. They don't want to hurt people's feelings. So when people say something 5 times over in the course of a conversation, generally people don't say anything, and they walk away, and they kind of hope that somebody will talk to them, that their family will notice, that their doctor will notice. But in my experience, and I'm working as a geriatric psychologist, and now I call myself a family coach here because I'm working more and more with families to help people figure out what's going on and to make decisions about care and plans. Because how many of you know people with dementia or an Alzheimer's? Everybody? Okay. How many of you are worried about it for yourself? You got over it? Oh. Well, I just want to tell you why I do this, why I'm on this mission. And about 15 years ago, I was consulting in a nursing home, and I was asked to see a woman named Felicity. And they said, Felicity is really depressed. She got Alzheimer's or dementia. She started to have really significant cognitive impairment, and her husband had died. She didn't have kids. She lived by herself, and she had a sister who lived on the East Coast who was called and said, family said, you know, you need to do something about your sister because she's wandering around the halls in this building where she lives. So her sister came out, and unfortunately it seemed that her sister didn't really like her very much, so she was not really her best ally. But she found a memory care unit for her, and she had her admitted, and she said to the staff she needs to be, you know, in a locked unit because she has an apartment downtown, and I don't want her to take the bus. I don't want her to get out of here. So that's really the law, is that you can't be locked in a memory care unit unless you're a danger to yourself. So you can't just be locked up for nothing. If you're not a wanderer, if you're not going to be unsafe and wander outside, you really can be on an assisted living or in a skilled care unit. But anyways, I was asked to see her because people said she was super depressed. She wasn't getting out of bed. So I walked into her room, and she had a double room. There was a curtain in the middle, just like an old-fashioned nursing home. And she was wearing a hospital gown. She had been in the hospital before she came, and she just refused to ever put on clothes or change. And she had been there for 6 months in the bed. And I looked at her, and she looked just like a Raggedy Ann doll. You know, she was just flopped with her hair hanging down. And I thought, this person, the life has gone out of her. And the staff had said, we really want you to diagnose her as being depressed or ask the doctor, because I don't prescribe medicines, ask the doctor to prescribe medicine. So I tried to talk to her a little bit, and she was really withdrawn and disengaged, and her memory was not very good. But I asked her, at the time I was really interested in using music with people with dementia. I don't know if any of you have seen the Alive Inside video or the musics where people put on headphones, and it's incredible. The part of the brain that enjoys music and that knows music and remembers music is really not impacted by dementia and Alzheimer's. So that part of people's brains, if you can connect people back up to the musical part of their brain, you see people come back to life. So I asked her if she liked music, because it was a particular thing I was doing at that time. And she said she did like music, and I said, what kind of music? She told me she liked Puccini. I'm like, oh, Puccini, I'll have to ask my sister who likes opera. I made the music, and I brought it, and I put it on her like a couple days later, and she sat up in bed. I mean, she went from ragdoll to like this, and she had her arms up, and she started directing the music, and she started singing, and she said, the woman has a red dress on. And she said, it's a German beer hall. And she started to tell me the whole story of the music she was listening to. And I was just blown away that I saw this person go from nearly dead to really fully alive and truly joyful. So I went out and I said to the staff, like, what do we know about this person? Like, this is like crazy what I'm seeing in here. Get in here and take a look at, the person that you want me to suggest meds for. And they said, well, we really hardly know anything about her. So I called her sister and I said, tell me about your sister. Like, what do we need to know about her? And she said, she was the harp player in a big international orchestra. And she and her husband was a cello player, and they spent their lives traveling the world and loving music. And even today, when I tell this story, it was so powerful to me that nobody knew who she was, and that she was lying in this bed. She had become a patient. She had lost her personhood. She had lost her autonomy. And after that, I thought, this can't happen in America. This can't happen anywhere. In other countries, where people really stay connected with their families and their loved ones, people know who they are and they maintain who they are. But there are a lot of us. I mean, how many of you in here are on your own? I am. Yeah, a lot of us are on our own. And if we start to lose our capacity to think clearly and plan and organize and manage our lives, who's going to get in there and put on the headset and help us get back to the things we love? So anyways, that moment was beyond powerful to me. And so I quit working in nursing homes, and I decided I was going to take my skills to the streets, and that I was really going to work on helping people and families to identify cognitive deficits earlier, so that, this woman, if somebody had noticed that her thinking was declining earlier, they could have taken her to the doctor. She could have had a conversation with the doctor about what was going on. And the doctor could have said, you know what, you're going to probably need care. And let's figure out how we're going to get you services and care set up. So as time goes on, if you need that care, it will be available to you. So my mission with you is to say, if something's going on with you, or if something is going on with people in your world that you know, do not ignore it, please. It's like COVID. We all got good. How many of you can identify COVID? Identify. How many of you know the symptoms of COVID? Yeah, everybody knows the symptoms of COVID. I mean, to me, that was an interesting time in history when the medical system said, we can't begin to meet the need of all the people who are getting sick and kind of frantically seeking medical care. And so they said to communities, like, educate yourselves, like pay attention. Do you have a fever? All of a sudden we see these, thermometers everywhere we went. Do you have a sore throat? Do you have these things going on? And probably all of us got good at identifying those things. My sister was just here a couple weeks ago, and she and her husband had gone to an Indigo Girls concert in Madison, Wisconsin before they came to visit. And my sister, the second day, my sister said, I have a sore throat. And I said, oh my God, I think you have COVID. And the next day after that, my sister had COVID. But it was because I had learned to identify what those symptoms were. And I said out loud, you know what, you got to take a test. They got in their rental car and they drove back to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So this is what I want you to do, is to think about using that same skill set that you used with identifying COVID to identify this. So, when I think about doing these talks, I think, it's kind of a treacherous subject, and I really am grateful for all of you coming. I sort of thought, well, maybe nobody will come because it's so scary, the stigma is so great, and so I'm very appreciative. But I want to make this more upbeat rather than treacherous and give you a sense of hopelessness. I want you to go home feeling better rather than feeling worse. And so I want to talk about normal aging and what is normal aging. And I want to start by saying that forgetting is normal. Forgetting is normal at any age. Write that down, memorize that. Because somehow we have been duped into thinking that we have to remember every single thing that goes on in our world. And the reality is that that's not how our brains function. Our brains pay attention to what it wants to pay attention to. And if it doesn't matter, think about giving someone a grocery list and they say, well, I'll remember it. And you say, okay, I want you to get cinnamon, milk, eggs, lettuce. And they go to the store and they're standing in the store and they don't care about those items. Those items don't matter, so they don't remember. You go to the store and you say, okay, I'm gonna make a salad for dinner. I'm making these muffins that require cinnamon. You put those things in context and you're probably gonna remember a little bit better. But memory is something that we have to pay deep attention in order to remember things. And one of the things that I'm aware of in this community is there are a lot of people with hearing problems, right? Now, in order to remember something, you have to hear it. You have to see it. But it has to come into your brain, because information, really the way our brain functions, is that the world produces information. It gives us information. We see, we hear, we taste, we smell, we feel with our skin, we feel as we move through space. Our bodies and all of our senses are the places that we get the information that goes into our brain to create memories. And it goes into different areas. There are different rooms, houses in your brain where the different information goes. The motor information goes somewhere, a part of your brain. The visual information goes to a particular part. So your brain is collecting all this information, but you have to pay attention in order for your brain to collect that information. And one of the things that does get worse as we age is paying attention. How many of you notice that your attention isn't what it used to be? I talk to a lot of people whose parents, there's some question about, is this dementia or is it something else? And it is so popular for people, younger people, people in their 30s and 40s who have kids, to identify their kids as having ADHD. It's very trendy, and it's probably partly real, but people are really paying attention to those kind of symptoms in kids. And then the parents say, oh, I have it too. And then what I hear people say is, well, my mother has it too. She's had it all her life. Or, but I think that one of the important things about aging is that our attention is not as good. So we have to work on paying attention in really different ways. So attention gets worse. Our memory does get worse. There have been studies of the people who were sort of the brilliant, the chess players, the surgeons, the pilots, the doctors, the whatever, the professionals who really, are the super brainy people, and you think, oh, they're so smart. But the reality is even those people who are practicing even in their professions have decline in their memory. I mean, decline in memory is a normal thing with aging. The difference between normal aging and dementia is that people with dementia have impairment in their functioning. You watch how they operate in their day-to-day life, and they can't manage their lives. Usually at the beginning of dementia, people are forgetful, and they can manage, and it's called mild cognitive impairment. They can still manage their lives. Maybe they need more lists, they need to really depend on a calendar and write things down. But early dementia does have increasing problems with memory. Okay, so we're gonna go to the, oh boy, it's not on there now. Okay. Okay. Actually, no, I'm going to just say a little bit more about the good thing about sort of normal aging and thinking is that most of us get worse with focusing our minds and attention. We also get worse at multitasking. And I know that if I'm doing two things at once, like frequently, I don't, like the other thing just like kind of falls off the rails. Like I can really only do things at once. And this isn't dementia. This is just getting older and having a brain that doesn't have, I think of it as the firepower. Probably none of us are going to run a 6-minute mile or 7 or 8 or 9. But our entire being is slowing down and doesn't have the firepower that it did. And that is not dementia. That is totally different. And so, I send you home today, with the thought that forgetting is normal, and that remembering everything is ridiculous. It's not going to happen. You're not going to remember everything. And that you need to really think about focusing, hearing, paying attention, maybe writing stuff down. That you have to decide what you really want to remember, because you're not going to remember everything. You say to yourself, this is important. And I oftentimes say to people, if you have a partner who you think doesn't pay attention or doesn't hear, you have to say to your partner, I need for you to have your hearing aids on, please. And I need for us to stand face to face and look at each other and talk to each other so that we make sure. And then sometimes you even need to check, like, tell me what I said. I just want to make sure you know. It's not being offensive, it's being caring, and it's maintaining your capacity to have a good relationship with somebody, because a lot of times people say, you never listen to me. I've told you 1,000,000 times. We got a couple in the back. She's looking at them. Okay. Sticky pads, yes, right. But strategies are good. But that kind of forgetting or that kind of not remembering. You will only remember what gets into your brain. It has to go in there. It has to find its home in your brain, and then it has to move to your long-term memory. And the difference between dementia and normal aging is that with dementia, you lose your capacity to move information from short-term memory to long-term memory. So something goes in, you hear it, you think you have it, but it doesn't go to long-term memory. So most of dementia, a real primary symptom is lack of new learning. And a lot of times people will say, I've told you that 100 times. Well, I'm going to tell you one more time. Today is Tuesday. And you're still not going to remember that today's Tuesday. Okay, so what are the 10 warning signs? I want you to pay attention. I'm not going to quiz you at the end, but I should.
Dementia is the umbrella term for an individual's changes in memory, thinking, or reasoning. There are many possible causes of dementia, and Alzheimer's is the most common cause. Other causes of dementia are vascular dementia, which is marked by changes in the blood flow in the blood vessels in the brain. dementia with Lewy bodies, identified by specific brain changes throughout the brain that include the buildup of a protein known as alpha-synuclein, and frontal-temporal dementia, which is marked by brain cell loss in the front sections of the brain or the frontal lobe. Each type of dementia may have distinct characteristics to cause specific behaviors in the individual, but there is also some overlap in behaviors among the types of dementia.
More than 100 years ago, Dr. Alzheimer described specific changes in the brain, what we now call the formation of plaques and tangles. Alzheimer's is a progressive brain disease that's marked by these key changes and impacts memory, thinking, and behavior. The brain has three main parts: the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. Each one plays a role in how the body functions. Alzheimer's disease causes nerve cells to die, which leads to brain tissue loss and causes loss of function and communication between cells. These changes can cause the symptoms of Alzheimer's, such as memory loss, behavioral issues, problems with thinking, planning, and at the end stage, swallowing.
It's important to know what the warning signs of Alzheimer's are and to be on the lookout. We know that we change over time, and the warning signs of Alzheimer's can be warning signs of a number of things, but when you see those in yourself or in someone you care about, it's important to check it out, to consult with a doctor, to find out what you're dealing with. Some of the things that can look like Alzheimer's may be other treatable conditions. If it is Alzheimer's, you still want to know as early as possible, because that gives the person and the family time to plan, time to make decisions, and it also gives the person with the disease a voice and allows them to say what they want.
I was probably spending 4 to 5 times more time preparing for something than I did, say, 5 or 10 years ago, because of I would lose my thought, I'd lose my focus, I'd get anxious, I wouldn't get to sleep. I was thinking, I was in my sleep, I was thinking about what I was anxious about, which was what I was trying to remember, which was what I was trying to prepare, which I was trying to do. So it was really a vicious circle of, so I was able to control it a lot, so that people wouldn't see things, and that there weren't things to be seen. It's what was disturbing me was what effort I had to put into to do the things I used to do more easily.
One of the things that's interesting to me, there are videos, a number of videos as we go on, and the interesting thing to me is that people seem so normal. I mean, didn't that guy seem pretty normal? Like there really isn't anything wrong. I mean, these are real people who have real dementia diagnoses, and they seem really normal. But you know, the issue is looking more closely and looking at people's capacity to function and manage their day-to-day life. The functional impairment, as a psychologist, that's what I look for. Are these disorders? Does the depression, the anxiety, the cognitive memory problems, does it get in the way of people living their life? Then we really worry about it. You know, if people have these disorders and they're doing fine, I say, you know, leave them alone. Okay, difficulty completing familiar tasks. People start cooking and they can't remember what they, you know, to take the turkey out of the freezer, you know, the day before Thanksgiving. People can't remember organizing a grocery list, or their games are different, or like lots of different changes in people's ability to manage complicated tasks.
Some people have difficulty with math or with reading in a way that's unusual to them. And once again, this is a change in that person. So for example, we all know somebody who was never able to balance their checkbook, right? So that wouldn't be a warning sign for them. But if somebody who always balanced their checkbook to the penny suddenly was paying bills, the same bill over and over, and not able to balance their finances, well, that would be a sign for them.
Confusion about time and place. People forget what day, date, they forget what year it is. I mean, I've seen many people who I think, well, you know, they seem just fine, and I ask them what year it is, and they have no idea. They think it's 1975. So one of the things that I do with people is I just play dumb, and I say, hey, what day is it today? You know, so just kind of getting a little bit of information, like, are people really plugged into time and place? I've talked to a lot of people who tell me they see people go downtown here and downtown Haley, and they're wandering around looking for their car, and they don't really know where they are, and they don't know where their car is. I've heard stories about people getting in the wrong cars. I say there are a lot of blue Subarus, but yes.
Well, so my question is, are there signals that indicate a certain stage along the path?
There are, and we're going to talk about them in the next couple of lectures. So, yes, there are. I mean, there is Alzheimer's disease, about 70 or 75% of dementias are Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's is a chronic progressive disorder that usually, they're saying now that usually it starts 20 years before the symptoms start to show up. There were nun studies. I don't know if people have heard about the nun studies, but there were studies of nuns that they took writing samples of nuns years and years ago, and then they looked at their writing samples over the years, and they could see the nuns who eventually got dementia and died with dementia. They could see that their writing and their sort of intellectual capacity and their capacity for sort of complex thinking was declining over time. So Alzheimer's is a very long, slow, chronic, progressive disorder. It is not precipitous. It doesn't happen just like this. If something happens just like this with people's thinking, memory, or behavior, there's something other than Alzheimer's going on, because it is not precipitous. Alzheimer's is really, as they said, is really the accumulation of something in the brain. We really don't know 100% what causes it, which is crazy, but hopefully it's coming. But it's an accumulation of what actually one author calls gunk in the brain, is stuff that really clogs up your brain, and it makes the connectivity in the brain less and less and less. I think about it as back in the day when we had long distance telephone service. I remember going to Europe, and it's like, hello, are you there? It's the connectivity, it's the electrical, it's the signals in your brain, it's your neurons in your brain that are sending information, you know, taking that information in, figuring out what to do with all that information, and making decisions. That process gets increasingly slowed down, and as the connectivity decreases, people's ability to think clearly and manage and function is less and less. Does that make sense to people? I kind of like the long distance comparison. When we get younger people in here, we're going to have trouble with that, but
Alzheimer's disease is not just a disease of memory. It can affect other things too. It can affect the way that we perceive what we see. So sometimes somebody in the early stages of Alzheimer's might go to the eye doctor because they're having trouble seeing, and in fact their vision is just fine, but the way they're perceiving what they're seeing may be difficult.
people have a difficult time seeing dark and light, their contrast. Sometimes you see people with dementia, they see a dark spot like that and they think they're going to step off a cliff. Like somehow their brain completely misinterprets those visual things. So it's important, you know, I think about people going hiking out here. Everybody hikes, and you hike around rocks and you're lifting your legs, and you know, your brain is having to really shift and change and tell your legs what to do continually. And this visual spatial stuff, your brain really doesn't know how to read things. And for me, this is one of the things why it's so important to think about driving, because the brain it's not able to scan the world and interpret distance very well.
The other thing that I've increasingly been struggling with are words, which I've dealt with words my entire life, you know, as an avid reader, as a reporter, as a writer. I struggle with them now.
So some people wonder if, if they lose their keys or their glasses or their purse, is that a sign of Alzheimer's? And one thing that I would say about that is, for most of us, we might misplace something, but then if we retrace our steps, we can usually find it. We can usually remember. For a person with Alzheimer's, sometimes they're not able to retrace their steps. Sometimes that memory is just gone. And so when they do find their keys next to the phone because they got interrupted by a phone call when they were coming in, they set their keys down in an unusual space, so there they are next to the phone. If that happened to you or me, we'd probably remember, oh yeah, the phone was ringing when I came in the door. I put down my keys. The person with Alzheimer's might not remember. They might wonder who's moving their keys around because they never put their keys by the phone. So that's just a little bit of a difference in some of the dynamics with losing things in Alzheimer's.
Okay, misplacing things and losing the ability to retrace steps. We all identify with that, I'm sure, more than we ever want to admit with our phones and our keys. But it's really losing those things repeatedly that becomes a problem. Where, I mean, I talked to one woman and she said, my husband's whole life is finding his pencil. She said he loses his pencil all day long and that's kind of his job. I would disagree with her and I would say it's a big difference. It's a really big difference. Because we all backtrack. When I lose my phone, I say, okay, what room was I in last, right? Where was I last? And you go back. I lost my car at the parking lot at the ski mountain one day. And I drove in, and I didn't have my skis with me. I was going to be able to more quickly go down the hills. And I thought, oh, I'm going to park on that side because it's steep, but I don't have my skis. And, so I was doing all this executive functioning, planning and organizing about the most efficient way to get to the ski hill. At the end of the day, I went to where my car always is, and it wasn't there. And honest to God, for 15 minutes, I walked back and forth in the same rows. If anybody was watching me, I'm sure they thought I was a lunatic. But then all of a sudden I said, okay, think back further. I said, retrace your steps. So I took myself back to driving into the parking lot. And the minute I thought about driving into the parking lot, I realized that I had that conversation with myself about, oh, I don't have my skis. People with dementia are not able to backtrack because that information, as I told you, no new learning, that information isn't in there. So hang on to your ability to backtrack, and sometimes backtrack further. Okay, decreasing or poor judgment about things. People do things that just seem kind of crazy, and it's important to pay attention to that.
The way I kept my house, and all of a sudden, everything was okay with me. It's like, oh, it's a pile, I'm tired. So my dining room table usually looked like it was someone's office, because I always would say I would do it tomorrow. And then my bedroom, as far as clothing, I would just put it in a corner, put it in a chair. And all of this is just, I wouldn't say it looked like I was a pet wreck, but really I was, because I never threw anything away. I always would say, I'll get to it, but I never did get to it. So just the way of my standard of living, it was actually decreasing.
Okay, people withdraw from work or social activities. They start to feel uncomfortable. They start to worry that people are going to wonder what's going on with them.
One of the most common changes, and early on, is the person's comfort zone shrinks a little bit, and then that gets worse throughout the course of the illness. So they're less comfortable going out, they're less motivated to do things than they were in the past. So there's some change in day-to-day functioning that way. I think people also lose confidence in their cognitive abilities because they may not recognize someone or know their name or find the right word, and they'll feel awkward, and they don't want people to notice that, so they feel more comfortable at home or in situations with family where they're very, very comfortable with that wouldn't concern them. So people tend to withdraw a little bit and be less outgoing. That's can be one of the early signs of Alzheimer's.
Changes in mood and personality. I hear this a lot. I volunteered at the senior center, and I hear lots of complaints about people crabbing about how other people are acting. And they get very irritated that if people misbehave, you know, if they're impulsive or intrusive, or a lot of times people with dementia, they have no control of the kinds of things that come out of their mouth. My own dad, I used to go to, he lived in a senior community when he was in his 90s, and he had dementia, and we'd sit in the dining room, and one day he said to me, in front of the guy who was the waiter, "That guy's retarded." And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe my dad. My dad would never have spoken like that. But, you know, that was his dementia. He had no impulse control. He has a feeling, and it's just like right out there. And people take it personally, and they get upset, and they get mad at their friends. And it's really important to know that this is a part of the disease, that the brain is really not evaluating what's going on. And even more important than the sort of the emotional impulsivity is that the brain is not able to evaluate what is going on with the self. When you think about yourself kind of going through your day-to-day life, aren't you always kind of self-monitoring? Like, what am I doing? What am I saying? Like, how does my hair look? You know, am I talking too loud? Am I doing this? Am I doing that? That self-monitoring and really observing like how we are in the world is important. I mean, that's how we, you know, sometimes I want to say something to somebody, but I say to myself, do you really want to say that? Like, that might come off as mean. Or, you know what I'm saying? That you really self-monitor kind of all that you do in your day-to-day life. And people with dementia develop a disorder called anosognosia, which I have really a hard time pronouncing, but I did it. Anyways, they develop anosognosia, which means that they do not recognize that there's anything wrong with them. And so people will say, actually I got a text today from somebody saying, my husband's in denial, you know, he says nothing's wrong with him, I know it's wrong with him, and she yells at him a lot because she wants him to know. And people don't recognize that there's something wrong. And that is another one of the main reasons that I really want to educate you guys, to educate the community, to say, if you expect that people are going to go to the doctor and say there's something wrong with my thinking, you have to think twice, because they're probably not going to do that, because they don't even know. Like early on, sometimes people know that their memory's not so great. But as I said, you know, forgetting is a normal part of life, so younger people are forgetting. And so forgetting, you know, like where's the point where you say, oh, I should go to the doctor and check it out? How many of you have gone to the doctor to talk to the doctor about your memory? I know this is a private question, thank you for sharing. But so there was something that went on that you sort of thought, okay, I've got to check this out.
For the last 30 years.
For the last 30 years. Okay, well.
But I was also in an area where I studied that kind of stuff.
Right. So you were like a little more advanced in terms of dealing with stigma, and you sort of said, okay, like just check it out. Yeah, well, you know, hopefully we will get to a point where we can say, just go check it out. Because the worst that you can find out is that you're, you know, that you're not so bad and that you're fine, and that, you know, maybe you need to make some changes in your lifestyle, but that in general, you don't have a disease.
What I found out is that I think the doctors were all would say, no, you're not. You don't have a problem. And that
A lot of doctors do that. A lot of doctors do that. And I mean, I think the truth of the matter is if you know somebody intimately who's having memory problems or having executive functioning, you can see that they get up in the morning and they can't figure out what to put on, or so they just keep the same clothes here and they put the same thing on every day. My own dad would come out in the middle of winter with, in the middle of the 90-degree days with a giant winter coat on. You know, that's executive functioning, that people's planning and ability to manage their lives is difficult. And the people who are closest to them really are the people who see that. And the people who are closest to them are the people who need to take themselves seriously. You know, it's kind of like knowing that your baby is crying, and after a while you kind of know what that baby is crying about. You know, it's like, it's not a complete mystery when the baby cries, because the baby cries for the same reason. And with dementia, it is really important to trust that if that person's thinking and planning and managing their life is changing, trust yourself. You know that there's something wrong. And you can take people to the doctor, and I like these people talking on here because they all seem really darn normal, don't they? You know, I sort of think like, how did they make that video? But there is a part of people's intellect and ability to carry themselves and manage that doesn't get worse. It, you know, it stays the same, but it's that brain functioning, that managing that information, thinking, brain connectivity that's deteriorating. So sometimes the doctors don't explore deeply enough, and I really want for our community to say, you know what, we understand this a little bit. It's not a complete mystery. And so, again, you got a week to memorize that.
Another early sign of Alzheimer's or dementia is subtle changes in behavior. So all of a sudden, the family may notice the person is more easily irritated, or more impatient, or a little moody, or have a shorter fuse, or more anxious. Now, there's lots of things that can cause that, but often that can be an early symptom of Alzheimer's or go along with the early symptoms of memory loss.
Okay, so these are the signs that are most important. And I just want you to think about the person. I asked some of you who were here a little earlier to think about somebody you know with some cognitive difficulties. And are there things that you recognize? I mean, does anybody have an example of somebody the frying pan dollar? Okay, well, I want to say in this situation when someone is talking about hurting themselves, the place to start is to say, we need to go see a doctor because there's something wrong. And it's easy to kind of think that if only I manage behavior better, I'm going to get this online. But really what you need is a good evaluation and assessment and getting the doctors to look more in depth. You know, if you go to a primary care doctor and you're there for a physical, they may zoom through this and really not notice. And so you have to say, we're concerned about cognition. And so sort of the next step is like expressing your concern to people. And in the last talk maybe that you were at, I said, I want you to all practice this sentence, and I want you to say, I'm concerned that your thinking is not as clear as it used to be. Okay, we're all going to say that. I'm concerned that your thinking is not as clear as it used to be. Okay, one more time.
I'm concerned that your thinking is not as clear as it used to be.
Okay, isn't that kind of a painless and kind way to say, I'm worried about you? And I really believe that our community is going to be 1,000,000 times better if we can step in when we see these people and say, I'm worried about you. And maybe to say, you know, I've noticed some of these things, maybe not. You know, it's up to your discretion. I find that when I say to people, I'm concerned that your thinking is not as good as it used to be, almost 100% of the time people say, yeah, you're right. Like, yeah, you're right. Like, sort of thank you for noticing. So I really want to urge you to lovingly think about how to care about the people around you, because I mean, I see too many people like my Raggedy Ann doll who had fallen through the cracks and nobody even knew who she was anymore. And I just think, we can have quality of life. I see people with severe dementia who have a quality of life because they're in a setting where they're managed. Someone says, you know what, like, we're not gonna use the frying pan, I'm gonna do the cooking. Like cooking the dollar isn't really what we're gonna do, so we're gonna do this. And so I want you to, let me hear you all say it one more time. I am concerned that your thinking is not as clear as it used to be. Okay, and you on live stream, you have to do it too. You have to do it 5 times because you have more time now. Okay, well, so are there any questions? Hello.
I wear hearing aids.
Yes.
One of those hearing disability people.
Yes.
So my question is, what I have observed in myself with a hearing problem is that I feel like there's a delay in my brain to make sense of what was said. And I said to somebody, is that dementia or is that hearing? I said to the audiologist, and he said, that's a hearing thing.
Yeah.
Where like everybody's talking and everybody's picking it up really fast, and then all of a sudden you feel like
You have to think about
about what everybody just said.
I think when you have hearing problems, you have to pay way more attention.
When you're listening to a conversation.
You have to pay way more attention. But I will also say this, that studies have come out in the last 5 or so, maybe 10 years, about the risk, what a huge risk factor hearing problems are for dementia. Yeah. That our brains need to be stimulated. And this is like the heavy lifting of the brain, is to hear and to process that information that comes in. You're all sitting out there and your brains are working hard thinking about what I'm talking about, or maybe you're thinking about what you want for lunch, but I'm not going to take that personally.
Sure.
But the brain, it's the hearing and the seeing and all that stimuli that comes in through your sensory systems that really gets your brain to work. And so I think, one of the things that people who are having problems with hearing do is they tend to withdraw from conversations, or people stop talking to them because they think, oh God, they can't hear me anyways. It takes, or they let things go by. They let things go by. And, I think it is really important for people to pay attention to your hearing. If you start to have hearing problems, do not ignore it. Do not let yourself go through years of your life without that stimulation for your brain. It's like lying on the couch for 5 years and then thinking you're going to be able to go run a marathon. It's like you got to keep yourself exercised, and that hearing is an important part of dementia. Sure. Marty?
In terms of the number of people that get dementia, or the percentage of population that get dementia, is it generally equal universally, or might it be more prevalent in different environments, natural environments, be it due to diet, due to exercise, due to water quality, due to air quality, things that might have different impacts on the brain, or maybe might be different for developed countries and undeveloped countries?
There are differences, yes, and there are certain things that make a difference. And my hope is that somehow brain health becomes more of a topic when we're this big. I remember when I was a kid, there was Jack LaLanne who did "Go You Chicken Fat, Go Away" push-ups every morning, and the brain health thing was not really emphasized. Now the brain health thing is being emphasized, but people are told do crossword puzzles or do these online games. But the studies are very clear that those things do not improve cognitive fitness. They don't improve overall cognitive fitness. They improve the skill that you're working on. If you're doing crossword puzzles, you're going to get better at crossword puzzles, but that is not going to translate. So I think it's important not to get duped into thinking that doing kind of one thing intellectually is going to change you. Really the studies say, recently I've been reading some things that say really the number one thing that there is a lot of science behind is that exercise is the best thing for your brain. It's the best thing for you for your cardiovascular, for your heart and your blood and your oxygen. How many of you are exercisers? Yeah, you know, I mean, the thing about this community is that a lot of people are crazy exercisers. And that's the good news, is that exercise really translates into good cardiovascular health, and that also translates into a lower incidence of dementia. So good eating is important, good activity, social engagement, you know, the communication. I mean, the studies are really clear that people who are socially engaged, that we are animals that are meant to be with other people and meant to be engaged. And I think as people get demented, I hear people talking about, well, you know, they're just going to keep living in their house and they'll get a home care person, and then they get a home care person that may not even speak their language, and they're alone and isolated. That is so bad for the brain. And maybe they're living in their gorgeous, fancy house, but social engagement, being with people, you know, really like going to the Senior Connection. I mean, the Senior Connection is just a godsend for people to be able to go and be engaged and to have exercise. And so, you know, I think when you hear people say, well, I don't want to go to the senior center, say, you know what, it's a good thing to go to the senior center. You're going to get a decent meal. It's really cheap. It's pretty tasty. Here I'm promoting you. Any other questions? Oh, so.
I'll repeat that. So looking at my question a little more broadly, you're in a city, a very heavily populated city.
Yeah.
There's a lot of car noise, there's a lot of pollution, there's all this activity you see in any large city. You're in a small city such as the Wood River Valley, any city here, and it's a very, very different environment. You don't have those noises, you don't have the level of pollution. You're in a village in Africa where you don't have the technology that we have, where we sit on our butts too much watching TV, perhaps. And so lifestyle changes quite dramatically in different parts of the country, different parts of the world. And my question was, is there a difference in the percentage of people with dementia in perhaps in more developed countries, more developed cities that have these environmental issues as opposed to communities that have these lesser man-made environmental issues?
You know, I can't really answer that. I haven't really seen studies. I mean, there are, like internationally, there are places where there are higher incidence of dementia, but it's very hard to get the data about really what's going on and about all the lifestyle factors. I mean, what we know, and a lot of things, actually I'll bring please everybody come back to the next three, and I'll bring a flow chart of the things that are risk factors. And it starts with things like childhood education. If people have early childhood education and their brains are stimulated, when you're a tiny kid, think about how tiny kids, you look at their faces when they're learning new things, and they are just absorbing things like we couldn't do in a million years at this age. But their brains are just growing and growing, and their brains are regenerating. And all of that early childhood education really serves people super well as they get older, because the brain is more developed and it has more of what's called cognitive reserve, is that the brain is, you know, it's had the ability to really grow deeply and in a big way, and for people to learn a lot. But also, I mean, health considerations, diabetes, obesity, hearing, I can't think of all of them at this point, but there are a lot of risk factors that are really important. And pollution is one of them. I mean, air pollution, I mean, you think about any kind of pollutants and what it does to your body. It does, you know, this brain is a pretty tiny, fragile thing. And so anything that's affecting your nervous system and your blood system is affecting your brain. So we'll talk more about that. I mean, these are great questions, really important questions. I mean, how are we going to decrease the number? Two of three of us are going to die without dementia. 1 in 3 of us is going to die with dementia. That's a pretty big number. It's a common problem. It is not a rare disorder, and that's why I really want to educate people, because if you get if you get diagnosed and some things you get diagnosed with are treatable. There are other things that look like dementia, but they're not. They might be depression, they might be hypothyroidism, they might be, biological medical things that are completely different than a deteriorating brain. And so if there's something going on, you want to make sure that you know so that you can treat what is treatable. And a lot is treatable. So don't give up hope. I mean, it sounds like you tried hard to figure out. And, a lot of people will say, oh, they have dementia, like, why go to the doctor? And it's like, you don't know if they have dementia. You want to know. You want to get educated.
It's a very interesting phenomena that people who have memory problems are often less aware of it than family members or their friends who know them well. One of the reasons for that is our ability to monitor ourselves, which is an important part of brain function, decreases when we start having memory problems. Not in everybody, but commonly, and more than half the people with memory problems. And so the person is just not keeping track of the trouble they're having day to day. But the family members are, paying attention. If they're paying attention, they see, boy, this is starting to happen a lot, and the person's not aware of it. So the family's more aware, and they may talk to their loved one about it, and they say, I've noticed you've been repeating yourself. And they say, I'm not repeating myself. And that could either be due to the fact that they're not aware of it, or they may not want to acknowledge it.
I was so adamant about what was happening to Daryl. I wasn't sure. I didn't know. And this wasn't the person that I know. This wasn't the person. Daryl was my husband was very, he always had to be building or designing or working with his hands. And it was getting to the point where he wasn't, and he was becoming very frustrated when he was forgetting to do things or go places.
I've had a couple of phone calls that I've been able to make in to the call center when I've had a couple of quick questions that I wanted to ask. There's been a couple of nights, 2 o'clock in the morning, you have questions, you have anxieties, and I was struggling dealing with them, and it's amazing. It was one of the best things I ever did, was keeping the call center on my favorites now. Just to know that there's somebody you can call who is aware of what you're going through.
When I went to the Alzheimer's Association website, which is alz.org, there I was trying to find out more about what was Alzheimer's, what really is this disease, what is younger onset Alzheimer's, what is dementia, is there a cure? How long has this been around? How many people are affected by this? Where can I go for resources? Where can I go for help? What do I do with this? How can I handle this? Is there more people like me out there? Is there someone that I can talk to if I need to? And there I found the support line that's 24 hours a day. And there I found where I can go for workshops, where I can go and read things and postings that people have done, where I can find out what events is happening in the Alzheimer's Association, where I can see how it's affecting people around the globe.
Since I've been diagnosed with dementia, the one place that I know I can go to for assistance and help and support is to the Alzheimer's Association. There are people there that I know by name that I can contact if I'm having a difficult time or if I'm struggling to find some resource, that they will provide that to me.
Now, I'm probably going over my time, so I gotta stop. But thank you all for your interest. I hope this is useful.
Thank you all so much for coming today, and look forward to having you all come back on May 23rd. So, same time, same place.
Same time, same place.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.